When my uncle, who I hadn't seen in years, called, I was surprised. He asked me to come and visit. He didn't say it outright. He was never the sentimental type. But I could hear it in his voice. The spaces between his words were slower, heavier. His name was Raymond, but everyone in Grafton just called him Ray. He was a quiet man, a woodworker who lived on the edge of town since my aunt passed. He never remarried and didn't move away either. He built things, fixed things, and let life pass around him. I was his only living family. And now, he was dying. So I drove back to Grafton, a town so small you have to zoom in extra on Google Maps to see it. But once it had you, it never let go. I thought it would feel strange after 10 years, but everything was exactly where I left it. The rusted grain silos, the one bar with 3 names, the same old paper taped to the church door announcing potlucks that happened weeks ago. Ray was thinner than I remembered, shakier too, but his eyes were sharp, and when I hugged him, he held on longer than I expected. The word cancer lingered in the air, but we both refused to acknowledge it. We both knew what kind of visit this was. From the looks of things, he didn't have long left. On the second morning, just before dawn, he woke me up with a thermos of black coffee and said, "It's the day." I knew what that meant. Hollow Lake sits just past the tree line east of town. Grafton was built around it, literally. The first settlers stopped here because the lake never ran dry, even during droughts. When rivers upstream shriveled to dust, Hollow Lake held. A mirror in the woods, cold, clear and deep. Except, every 7 years, it vanishes. Completely. One day it's full, the next it's gone, like someone pulled the plug at the bottom. No one knows why or how. Many have studied it, but found nothing. The ground underneath didn't make sense, geologically impossible, structurally hollow. Nothing should be able to hold that kind of depth without collapsing. But it does. And since it always comes back 4 days later every time, the town stopped asking questions. People just call it the hollowing, like it's weather. Ray had seen it happen 5 times in his life. He'd always gone alone. This time, he said he didn't want to. We parked on the overlook ridge before sunrise. I sat in the passenger seat, shivering under the quilt he kept folded in the back of his truck. He sipped from his thermos in silence, looking out over the tree line. The sun rose slow, fat and red. I expected to see mist, maybe frost on the treetops. But when we reached the ridge, the lake was already gone. It didn't look dry. It looked scoured, like something had scraped it clean. Just pale, fractured earth that seemed too smooth, a wound, not a lake bed. And in the very center, maybe 50 yards across from the shore, something new. It looked like stone at first, a circle cut clean into the ground, perfectly round. The morning light caught the edge, and I saw depth, a depression. No, stairs. A spiral descending into darkness. No railings or moss, just smooth, dry stone leading into the earth. My stomach turned. Ray stared at it silently, gripping the steering wheel hard with both hands. "It's never left anything behind before," I said. He shook his head slowly, eyes fixed on the spiral. Not where we could see it. We sat there for a long time, the silence between us stretching across the lake bed like a second horizon. Ray's breath whistled in and out of his nose, shallow and uneven. I thought he might be crying, but when he turned to look at me, his face was dry, just hollow in a way I'd never seen before. "I never told you," he said, "but I used to come here every cycle, even when I said I wouldn't, even when it scared me." "Why?" He looked back toward the stairwell. The wind shifted, and for a second, I thought I smelled something. Old air, stale and waiting. "Because I thought maybe one day it'd show me something," he said. "And now, I think it finally will." We didn't speak much on the drive home from the lake. Ray seemed somewhere else entirely. He kept glancing back in the rearview mirror like something was following us, but it didn't feel like it was out of fear. It was almost hope. Back at the house, he made tea, sat in his old chair, and stared out the window until he nodded off. I didn't press him. He looked peaceful. I slept hard that night, harder than I meant to. A mix of travel fatigue, the cold mountain air, and the weight of silence that filled Ray's house like insulation. When I finally stirred, it was almost noon. Sunlight carved rectangles across the kitchen floor. The house was quiet. I called out to him. Nothing. I checked the workshop, the shed. The truck was gone. On the kitchen table sat two things: an envelope with my name on it, and a leather-bound journal with a cracked spine and a heavy feel, like it had soaked up years of smoke and sweat and time. The note was short. Ray's handwriting was thin, rushed. "I think this is my last chance. Don't follow unless it calls you. But if it does, read this first. Ray." The back door was unlocked. He'd taken his coat, and, I assumed, the keys. I sat down with the journal and started to read. He'd been writing in it for over 30 years, always after a cycle. The entries were fragmented, some half-finished, others crossed out, entire pages torn. But patterns emerged. Drawings of the lake bed, measurements of its depth, lists of people who disappeared over the years during the hollowings. And then that word, over and over, written in the margins, circled, underlined. Rathvor. Beneath it, in one scrawled note, a wound that doesn't bleed. Ray hadn't just been visiting the lake. He'd been waiting. But for what? I didn't know. Something inside me shifted. Grief hadn't hit yet, not properly. This felt more like an ache with no edges. I wanted to respect his choice, to go out on his own terms, into the place that was his obsession. But I couldn't leave it there, not with so many pages unanswered. So, I started asking around. The only person in town who didn't look at me like I was talking nonsense was Lester, a wiry old man who ran the bait shop down by the railway tracks. He smelled like old leather and menthols, and when I mentioned Ray, he poured 2 bourbons. "I saw it once," he said after the second glass. "The stairwell, when I was a boy. Thought it was a sinkhole, until I saw someone walking down in a hurry." Who? He shook his head. No one you'd know. No one we saw again, either. I mentioned the word, wrathful. His hands froze mid-pour. Where'd you hear that? Ray's journal. His face tightened. My grandfather used that word, said it was older than English, not Latin either. Thought it might have been local tribe. He said the ground there isn't land. It's a scab. It translates to a wound that doesn't bleed. But what it truly means is a mystery. What did he find? Lester tapped the side of his head. Never said, but he came back different, like something was missing or added. We stopped letting him babysit after that. He got quiet after that. I pressed him, gently, then harder, but he only muttered, "If you're serious about this, go check the church basement. That's where they kept the records on the ones who came back wrong." I didn't want to believe him, but curiosity, guilt, grief, they pull harder than logic when you're unmoored. So that night, I went to the church. I didn't expect the side door to be unlocked, but it was. The basement smelled like mildew and old candle wax. I had to break the lock on an old storage cabinet behind the water heater. Inside were boxes stacked like graves, brittle folders, dusty ledgers, and hand-drawn maps of the town. And lists. Dozens of them. Names of residents from previous hollowings, annotated with dates and little notes in the margins. Things like rejected, sent away, and sometimes just uninvited. There were photographs too, faded Polaroids and black and white group shots. But one stood out. A crowd of townsfolk standing at the lake's edge, holding hands back to the camera, heads bowed like mourners. And barely in the frame was the edge of the stairwell, already there, already waiting. Someone sickly looking, heading towards the entrance. I tried to leave it alone. I really did. Ray made his choice. He left the journal, left the note. It should have been enough. It was his life, his perfect ending. For the next 2 days, I stayed in the house. I chopped wood, boiled coffee I never drank, read the same sentence in a book 12 times, and couldn't tell you what it said. I even folded his clothes just to move my hands. But silence has a way of stretching when you're grieving. It doesn't scream. It just hangs, heavy, pushing me forward. And at night, I'd wake up thinking I heard footsteps on the porch, always soft, always fading before I reached the window. Once, I swear I saw the truck back in the drive just for a second. The journal sat on the kitchen table the whole time. I tried not to look at it, which meant, of course, that I did. It was full of half-thoughts, scratched-out diagrams, dates, names. Some crossed out, others circled. One margin just read, "It only opens for the broken." The word broken was underlined so many times the paper had torn. I kept asking myself why Ray left it for me. Why did he want me to see the lake before he went? Why he thought this was something I should understand. I didn't grow up broken. Not really. No trauma. Just a normal, quiet life. I went to college, moved away, tried to make something of myself. Never quite did, but I didn't fall apart either. Just drifted. Isn't that enough? Eventually, I gave up pretending. I packed a bag, took the journal, locked the door out of habit, though no one in Grafton ever does. And I went back to the lake. The sky was overcast, and the basin looked different in that light. It felt flatter, like it had been painted on. Just that wide, open mouth in the center, waiting. From up close, the structure didn't look ancient. It didn't even look man-made. It looked like the earth itself had decided to open. I walked to the edge. The stairs spiraled down farther than I could see, tight like a drill bit turning slowly into the ground. I dropped a small stone and never heard it land. The stone smelled faintly of wet copper. There was no moss or moisture, and strangely, no signs of weathering. Yet, the stairs felt worn, as if hundreds of people had walked them, always in the same direction. "You're not the only one who hears it." I turned. A woman stood a few yards off. She was maybe in her mid-40s, boots scuffed, hair pulled back with a red scarf that looked handmade. She didn't look like a local, but she didn't look lost either. More like someone who'd returned from a long detour. "I'm sorry," I said. She stepped closer. "The lake, the timing, the pull. You feel it too, don't you?" Her name was Grace. She said she grew up in a town near here, long since emptied out and folded into Grafton sprawl. She moved away when she was 17, married, divorced, a few dead ends in between. She said the dream started 6 weeks ago. "Every night," she said, "same thing, a dried out lake, a spiral in the earth, and someone waiting at the bottom, someone I used to know, calling me. Do you think it's real?" She looked out over the basin like she was trying to remember something. "I think the land remembers who we are," she said, "and sometimes it calls in the debt." Before I could ask more, she started walking toward the stairwell. Her movements were slow. She didn't act hypnotized, she moved with intention. "Wait," I said, "you're just going in?" Grace glanced back at me, smiling. "Isn't that why you're here?" She stepped onto the first stair, then the next, and was gone in the spiral. I stood at the edge for a while, torn between two instincts, the one that wanted to run, and the one that wanted to follow her to see what was inside. Ray had gone in, Grace had gone in, so I told myself I'd just follow a little, just enough to see what they saw. I felt more comfortable doing it with someone around. So that's exactly what I did. The air changed after the 6th step. I was only going far enough to find Grace, and maybe a bit further to see what she was looking for. But after the first few turns, I realized how quickly distance started to lose meaning. The stairs twisted in tighter spirals, each step worn but solid. There were no marks from tools, just seamless, cold stone beneath my boots. And silence. I called out once. My voice didn't echo. It didn't carry at all. It just stopped like it had hit a wall. Grace didn't answer. I kept going. Despite my footsteps thundering in my ears, whenever I stopped, things were silent. I couldn't hear Grace's trail at all. I felt like I should have, knowing her lead wasn't that far ahead, but it felt like I was utterly alone. So I sped up a bit to see if I just lagged behind. The walls began to change in presence. I passed carvings, but they weren't symbols, not letters or runes. Arrangements, human shapes, some kneeling, some stretched upward, some folded into impossible poses, head to feet, like collapsing in prayer or pain. Were they meant to be worshipping, or were they being reshaped into worship? I kept going. Eventually, I came to a landing, the first flat surface since I entered, a wide chamber with a ceiling too high to see. In the center was a monolith, about shoulder height, stone, smooth, slightly tapered toward the top. Not carved or etched, but stained. Faint handprints marked every side, hundreds of them, some fresh, some were so old they looked fossilized into the rock. I placed my palm over one. It was still warm, but nothing happened. However, when I looked over a few of the handprints, I got a strange feeling. Two of the fresher-looking imprints felt familiar. I could only think of Ray and Grace. I obviously couldn't recognize them by their fingerprints. Still, just looking at them, I felt a familiarity, like I was looking them in the eyes. It was strange. I don't know why, but that was the moment I wanted to leave. Out of the sense that I was intruding on something that had waited too long, too patiently to be understood. I turned back toward the stairs. And that's when I saw Grace stood 3 steps up, just out of reach. Her eyes were calm, her expression unreadable. "I didn't hear you come down," I said. "I was already here. How far did you go?" She silently tilted her head like she was listening to something I couldn't hear. Then she asked, "Did it show you yours yet?" I hesitated. "No, I don't think so." She smiled, gently, sadly. "Then you're not done." And without waiting for me to follow, she turned and walked deeper into the dark. We walked in silence for what felt like hours. The walls grew tighter, closer, like the air itself was pressing in. The stone began to hum under my feet, faintly, like a muscle twitching beneath the surface. Grace walked ahead of me without a flashlight. Her bare arms didn't flinch in the cold. She never stumbled. I asked her once how far this place went. She just said, "Far enough." The further we went, the stranger it got. The architecture stopped making sense. The angles turned inward, folding in ways I couldn't track. At one point, I looked back and realized I couldn't see where we'd come from. Not just because it was dark, but the spiral behind us looked completely different. My body still obeyed gravity, but my balance fought me. I leaned left and started drifting slightly right, like my own weight had developed second thoughts. Grace never slowed. She murmured to herself sometimes. Or maybe not to herself, just to someone I couldn't hear. I caught bits of it, phrases like, "It's not pain they want," she once said. "It's the shape pain leaves behind." And, "They can't open what's sealed, but they can wait for the cracks." Her words landed like riddles, but she said them with the certainty of someone remembering a dream in perfect clarity. And the way she glanced at me, like I was the answer, not the question, made something uneasy settle in my gut. "You've been here before," she said suddenly. "No," I told her. "This is my first time." She smiled, but with a kind of sadness I didn't understand. "You're walking ahead of me," I said. "That's the only way I know where to go." "Deep down, you know where to go. You're just nervous," she replied. I didn't know what to say. She kept walking. I followed. This wasn't true. I was disoriented without her, depending on light, whereas she seemed to navigate with a sense foreign to humans. Maybe I should have corrected her, told her I didn't belong here, that I was just chasing someone else's goodbye. But I didn't. I didn't understand what this place was, or why it opened, or why people came here to disappear. I just wanted to. I needed to. And even though my skin crawled and some small voice in the back of my mind begged me to stop, I didn't. I followed her deeper, because curiosity is its own kind of hunger. And I was starving. I knew we were close because the cold stopped feeling natural. Then we turned a corner, and the spiral opened up into a space so vast it made my stomach twist. The chamber was enormous. I couldn't tell if it was unnatural or predated the concept of natural. It felt wrong in scale, as though it had been hollowed out of the world without permission. It breathed in silence. It loomed. At the center, sunken below us, were forms. Dozens of them, maybe more. Pale, folded things, like human silhouettes wrapped in themselves, gently shifting as if caught in a current I couldn't see. They didn't move on their own. They were being moved, the way wind passes over wheat fields, moths caught mid-dream. I didn't ask Grace what they were. I think I knew. At the far end was something, not a statue or an altar, but a presence shaped like both. It pulsed, slow and rhythmic, like a sleeping lung. Its surface was stone, mostly, but it bent and flexed like muscle underwater. Parts of it retracted, others bloomed. It wasn't alive in any way I recognized, but it also wasn't dead. Just waiting. And it had been for a long time. Grace didn't hesitate. She walked toward it like she'd finally found home. Her arms lowered to her sides, her shoulders loosened. She stepped into the shallow basin of the chamber and up to the altar. She didn't pray. She just opened her hands and whispered, "I'm ready." The altar answered without sound. I felt it more than heard it, like a tuning fork against my bones. Grace lifted onto the balls of her feet, and then she began to come apart. It wasn't violent or painful. She simply unwound. Skin first, pulling back like paper curling near flame. Her clothes melted with her, her skin wrapped into curves, all color draining until they were white, almost translucent. There was no blood, no scream, just her face smiling through tears. It looked like whatever was happening was stripping all pain away, both physical and mental. Her body started curling downward, knees tucked in, arms wrapped around them. And as the husk of her skin was slowly about to cover her, she spoke to me with what remained of her mind. "This is what I wanted," she said, voice barely audible. "This is what I needed to become. Relief, salvation, the size of your pain." She looked at me then. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was shaking, hands clenched, body screaming to flee. But I was frozen, scared if I moved, I'd trigger whatever was happening to her. But nothing happened. The altar stilled, the chamber grew quiet again. My skin stayed whole, my breath fogged in the air. I looked down at myself and knew it was the way you know you've been forgotten at a party. I hadn't been chosen. I wasn't invited. Grace's smile faltered, her face barely peeking through the cocoon about to envelop her for God knows how long. She stared at me, blinking, like seeing me for the first time. Horror crept into her face as the last of her hands dissolved into dust. "You weren't marked," she whispered. I took a step toward her, but she recoiled in confusion. She reached out, tried to, a feeble gesture I didn't understand, until what she said next. "You need to get out," she said, voice breaking. "Only those chosen are safe." And then she was gone. The chamber dimmed, and for a second there was nothing but my pulse hammering in the silence. Then the altar pulsed once. A ripple ran through the floor, the walls quivered, then shifted, subtle at first, like stone taking a deeper breath. And then I heard it. Dripping. Water splashed against stone through the walls, then closer still. The lake was refilling. I didn't know how long that process took. Minutes, seconds. But the sound of rushing water rolling down the spiral made my throat tighten. A draft pushed down from above, carrying the scent of wet earth and cold depth. I didn't think. I ran. The staircase writhed beneath my feet. Steps stretched, then shrank. Landings folded out of existence. Doorways appeared, only to collapse back into the walls like the place was trying to inhale me. The whole structure felt alive now, awake, and not pleased with my intrusion. As I climbed, the walls began to change. Stone bulged into shapes, scenes, memories. My memories, but wrong. It was like a twisted game of association. The visage of an object would form. A toy gun, which instantly made me relive a memory in my head of my 9th birthday party. Only a few friends showed up, and that was one of the presents I was given. Then a car wheel. My dad showed me the process of changing a tire, and I sprained my wrist when I dropped a tool. The place was trying to break me, trying to find a fracture, a regret, a wound deep enough to open me, the way it opened Grace. It wanted something to hurt. But it couldn't find one. Only memories of slight discomfort or mild embarrassments. Nothing strong that it could relieve me from, pull me into its fold in exchange of the loss of such strong pain. And when it didn't find one, it tried making one. A memory formed beside me. Me, age 12, standing at the foot of the lake with Ray. Only now, Ray walked into the water alone while I stood on shore doing nothing, just watching him drown. I stumbled, nauseated. That had never happened, but the memory felt heavy, familiar, like guilt someone else had carved for me. I started feeling the guilt, lines going through my head. "You should have saved him. It's your fault. This was too much to bear." I kept climbing, faster. The stairs tilted as water surged downward, splashing my ankles. Panic clawed at my ribs. All the while, memories were forced into my head. Painful ones. A painful divorce, not being able to find love, the loss of a beloved pet. All I knew were not real, but they felt real. And, like a fisherman's hook, it pulled, the barbed tip sinking into my cheek. I could feel it. My skin started to feel alien to me, rejected and ready to leave. But just as the spiral twisted in on itself and my path began to collapse, I saw him. Ray, standing on a landing higher up the spiral, lit by a pale glow that didn't come from any natural source. He was pale, slightly translucent, hardened skin hanging off him. He was turned, but he was using the last of himself before being eternally let to rest. He smiled, soft and familiar. "You came anyway," he said. "You always were too curious." My throat tightened. "Ray, did you?" He held up a hand, not to silence me, but to ready me. "I'm all right," he said. "I went where I needed to go, because I was ready. You're not. Still got plenty of good time in you." The structure groaned. Water blasted up the spiral behind me, chasing my heels. Ray reached out, and when I took his hand, the staircase stopped shifting, the walls softened, the false memories shattered like brittle clay. For a moment, everything aligned, solid, stable, real. He looked me in the eyes, and I understood. He was anchoring me, using whatever remained of him in this place, delaying his disappearance, to help me leave. "You're not meant for this," he said, not unkindly, "and that's not a punishment." The water surged again, roaring. Ray squeezed my hand once, then he guided me upward. A brief, unbearable farewell, and let me go before the rising lake swallowed the chamber behind me. I climbed the last stretch alone, but I didn't feel alone. Not anymore. I barely surfaced. The water lapped up the last few stairs, swirling around my knees, then my chest. It came faster than seemed possible, rising like it had always meant to. My lungs were burning by the time I saw the light above. I pushed off the last stone step and swam, hard and desperate, everything in me screaming not to stop. My limbs went numb, the water thickened, the pressure of the whole spiral below tugged at my heels like it was trying to keep me, like I'd broken a rule I didn't understand. I breached the surface with a gasp so violent it scraped my throat raw. The lake was almost full again. Ripples widened around me, dark and cold, swallowing the last trace of the spiral. The stone rim had vanished entirely beneath the water. I swam toward the shore, lungs sputtering, muscles cramping with every pull. When my feet finally touched solid ground, I staggered up the rocky bank and collapsed. The air was sharp and brittle, the cold that scraped at your skin and told you you'd survived something you weren't meant to. The sky was soft grey, mist hung low over the water. Behind me, Hollow Lake looked whole again, like it had never left. No evidence that any of it had happened at all. I stared at the water for a long time, waiting for something, anything. But it was just a lake, calm and normal, indifferent. When I sat up, coughing water and blood into my hands, I felt something weighted in the strap of my pack. I pulled it out. Ray's old army jacket, worn at the cuffs, torn at the collar. I reached into the inside pocket. Folded between the lining was a photo, cracked and faded from time. It was of us, taken when I was maybe 9. I'm smiling with my front teeth missing. Ray had one arm around my shoulder and the other holding up a peace sign, halfway covering the camera lens. There was writing on the back, in his handwriting. You weren't broken, so live. I didn't cry. I just sat there, listening to the wind sweep over the lake and let the weight of it settle. I was still here. Weeks passed before I felt steady on my feet again. I stayed in Grafton to finish handling Ray's affairs, sorting his tools, boxing up his books, meeting with a lawyer about the cabin. There was a strange comfort in the routine. I kept expecting to find him in the workshop or hear him cough in the other room. Habit is a stubborn thing, grief even more so. The lake was back to normal, and the town treated it so. Smooth as glass, clear enough to see the stones near the shoreline. No one talked about the spiral, because no one else had seen it, or if they had, they pretended otherwise. That's a talent small towns develop like a callus. People would nod politely when they saw me, ask if I was staying long, and then change the subject before I could answer. It was like they sensed something was different about me without knowing what. Or maybe that's just how it always was, and I'd never noticed. One evening, I wandered down to Lester's bait shop. He saw me through the window and had a glass poured before I even sat down. He didn't ask where I'd been. He didn't mention Ray, nor bring up the lake. That silence between locals is its own form of hospitality. I turned the glass slowly in my hands before I spoke. Lester, I said, you told me about the ones who came back wrong. Have you ever known someone who came back right? He didn't look up immediately, just kept staring into the bottom of his drink as if something down there might float to the surface. Only once, he said finally. Long time ago. What happened to them? He shrugged. Didn't say much, but he never tried to go back. I waited for him to elaborate, but he didn't. And somehow, that was enough. A glimmer of hope that I will be fine. When I left the shop, the sky was turning amber, and the air carried that late autumn chill that always feels like an ending. I walked to the lake. The surface was perfectly still, not even a ripple. If there was anything beneath it, if it remembered me, or Ray, or Grace, it didn't show. I didn't speak to it, didn't ask questions that wouldn't be answered. I just watched the water hold the sky in its reflection and felt something settle in my chest, a kind of permission to keep moving. As I turned to leave, a thought came to me, soft and unbidden. It never opened for me, but maybe that means I still have something left to give. And for the first time since the spiral, the thought didn't hurt. It felt like hope.